Blog Talk Radio.
Mi chiamo Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, Neye, AMANSEM da, Medinde Odwirafo, Kwesi, Nehem, Ptah, Akhan, Aakhuamuman, Amaruka, Atifi, Mu, Odwirafo, Odwiramain, Mu. Greetings to all Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, meaning Africans, Black people. Today is AMANSEM Day, Affairs of the Nation Day. My name is Odwirafo, Kwesi, Nehem, Ptah, Akhan. Odwirafo of the Aakhuamuman nation in North America within Odwirama, the purified nation, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people in the Western Hemisphere. Yet I say we thank you once again for tuning into the broadcast. We have opened up the chat room. If you have any questions or comments, you want to interact in the chat room, you must log in as a user in order to interact in the chat room. If you don't have a username, you can sign up for one quickly in Blog Talk. If you have any questions or comments on the phone line, simply hit the number 1 so that we can see that your hand is raised. For those who are new to the broadcast, we have 4 broadcasts on a weekly basis. We have Akanfo Nanasom, ancient authentic Akhan ancestral religion on Joda on Monday nights, where we still deal specifically with the Akhan expression of ancestral religion. First and foremost, because we are Akhan. Secondly, because of misinformation being propagated regarding Akhan philosophy, culture, ancestral religious practice, and so forth, from the continent as well as from the Western Hemisphere, for those who have been infected with white culture in the Western Hemisphere as well as on the continent, and therefore their presentation of traditional Akhan ancestral religion has been infected. So we deal with ancient, authentic Akhan ancestral religion going back to our ancestral blood circle of ancient Khanat, which is a title of ancient Nubia, the Khanit land or Khanat. Our people originated in that region. We migrated away from ancient Khanat. Some of our people, a couple of thousand years ago, reestablished the Khanat Empire in the western part of the continent of Afuraitkaitnit, Africa. The Empire of Ghana. About 1,000 years later, some of our people migrated further south into the forest belt regions of today's contemporary Ghana and Ivory Coast. We dwelled in that region. A few hundred years later, some of our people were forced from those regions into the Western Hemisphere during the Musuo Kessie, the Great Diversity, the enslavement era. And this is how Akhan people ended up in North Central South America, the Caribbean, and Europe. However, we maintained our ancestral religious traditions. Thus, Winti is the Akhan ancestral religion preserved in South America in Suriname. Obia is the Akhan ancestral religion preserved in Jamaica. Hoodoo is the Akhan ancestral religion preserved in the United States, in North America. Hoodoo coming from the Akhan term undu, meaning medicine from roots, trees, plant life, as well as mineral life. It also means to become heavy with the spirit, to bring the spirits of the Abosom, the deities, and the Nananom Nsamanfo, the spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors of our direct blood circles down through Kanche, through conjure. This is what Hoodoo or Undu means. So we maintained our ancestral religious practices as Akhan people. We were inspired and motivated and guided through ancestral religion to wage war against the whites and their offspring, chemical and biological warfare, as well as physical confrontation utilizing metal armaments and so forth. We waged war against the whites and their offspring and forced the end of enslavement, emancipation, forced repatriation initiatives, abolition initiatives, and so forth, because of the wars we waged against the whites and their offspring. So this is what we deal with on Akanfo Nanasom, ancient authentic Akhan ancestral religion on Joda Monday nights. We deal with the nature of the Abosom, the deities, the nature of the Nananom Nsamanfo, the spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors of our direct blood circles. Nyamewa and Nyame, the great mother and great father. Yonkompon and Yonkonton, the Creator and Creatress, who are called Ra and Ra'ed in ancient Kemet, and the Akradim Bosom, the Abosom, the deities that govern the 7 days of the week, animating the solar, lunar, and planetary bodies that govern the 7-day week and so forth, a number of different topics. On Ojira, broadcast Ojira, which we broadcast on Benada Tuesday nights. Ojira means purification. It also means to celebrate a ceremony of purification. We deal with ancestral religion in general, not just the Akhan expression, but ancestral religion in general. Wherever Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, African black people exist in the world, and we show how it impacts every aspect of our lives. Ancestral religion, in essence, is the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance. That means through ritual, we incorporate those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to incorporate in order to harmonize our thoughts, intentions, and actions with divine order. And through ritual, we reject those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to reject in order to restore balance to our thoughts, intentions, and actions, and thus realign ourselves with divine order. So the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance are the expansive and contractive poles of ancestral religion. We say that Ojira, purification, operationalizes Nanasom. Purification operationalizes our practice of ancestral religion, the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance. This is the means by which we animate our culture. Our ancestral culture is the divine acceptance, the law, love of order, and the divine rejection or hatred of disorder. We seek to align every thought, every intention, and every action, every moment of every day with divine order. When we make mistakes, then we engage the ritual practice of incorporating law and restoring balance through Nanasom, through ancestral religion, so that we can get ourselves back on track, so we can consistently align every thought, intention, and action every moment of every day with divine order so that we can execute our function in creation. So this is why we deal with Ojira, purification, like our ancestral religion impacts every aspect of our lives, impacts our values, our approach to life, and so forth, and how we overcome our obstacles. On Awukuda, Akwada, Wednesday nights, we have Egua Marketplace. We showcase Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, or African black businesses, organizations, and institutions, those who are serving the Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit community in a positive capacity, also those who maintain their ancestral religious values in the context of that service to the community. We have published our Okom economic development model, which is an approach to economic development rooted in our ancestral religious values. It is thus a holistic approach to economic development, dealing with the 7 principal values of AMANSEM nation building, governed by the forces in nature that govern the 7 days of the week, the solar, lunar, and planetary bodies that govern that 7-day cycle, which governs all natural cycles on Earth. Therefore, we have 7 principal values of nation building, methods of food production and preservation, methods of curing disease, establishing a military structure, establishing training institutions, educational training, cultural, ritual, religious, and so forth, establishing sound systems of governance and jurisprudence, the building of homes on acquired land, and also the manufacturing of clothing. These 7 principal values we deal with. So when we have businesses and organizations and institutions, they're dealing with one or more of these principal values of nation building, restoration. Part of our Okom economic development model is the strategy we employ called Starve the Beast and Feed the Pride. That means you make an assessment on a weekly basis to determine what funds you would have potentially wasted with the whites and their offspring, and then you starve the beast and feed the pride. You reallocate those funds away from the white businesses and direct them to the business, organization, or institution of the week. We target one Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit business, organization, or institution per week for 52 weeks for optimal capital infusion. Thus, when we engage that process of starving the beast and feeding the pride as a collective, if one individual takes $10 he would have wasted with the whites and offspring and starves that white beast and feeds the pride, directs it to the black business of the week, then that's an infusion of $10, a transfer of capital from a white business to a black business. When 1,000 of our people engage that process, then that's an infusion of $10,000, starving the white beast and feeding the black pride An infusion of $10,000 in a black business in the course of 1 week allows them to hire within the community immediately and permanently, expand their products and services to us, serve us at a greater capacity. If we do not engage this process, then by default, we leave the $10,000 in the hands of the whites and their offspring. By default, we are financing our own oppression. So we must starve the beast and feed the pride on a weekly basis. So this is what we deal with on a Goa Marketplace Day. We also have, of course, Yada Abada Thursday. Tonight is AMANSEM, Affairs of the Nation. Oman means nation, Asem means affairs. So the affairs of the nation. We deal with current issues, perceived and real obstacles, and how to approach issues and overcome perceived and real obstacles from a nationist perspective, from an Amaniye perspective. We talk about Amaniye nationism, the purification of nationalism. We talk about Oman, a nation, and we designate ourselves Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, African black people in the Western Hemisphere as Odwirafo, the purified Odwira, Oman, nation, mind, the land of the setting sun, the Western Hemisphere. These terms can be found in ancient Kemet and Kanat, Jira meaning purification, mind meaning nation or polity, municipality, mind also meaning the land of the setting sun, the West. We are the purified Ojira nation, Oman, in the land of the setting sun, the Western Hemisphere, Oman. Ojira mind as a collective. Afuraitkaitnit people who were forced into the Western Hemisphere, but through our natural organic process, some of us are drawn together to coalesce in this region of the Earth Mother, on this region of her body in the West, interfacing with the Earth Mother in this region, her unique energy that emanates from this region. We incorporate that as we interface with her, our blending of ancestral blood circles in this region as a collective, drawing back Nananom Nsamampo spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors through these blended blood circles in the context of interfacing with this region of Asase Afur, the fertile Earth Mother in this region, as well as the manifestation, Bosom, the Orisha, the Vodou, the divinities, in their unique expressions in this region of the Earth Mother. That combination of forces collectively defines us as Ojiraman, the purified nation, Afuraitkaitnit people in the Western Hemisphere. And our expression of culture, our expression of ancestral religion is unique and rooted in our locative identity. As we migrated and reconvened, coalesced according to the dictates of our ancestresses and ancestors and the Abosom in this region of the Earth Mother, we forged a collective identity, a locative identity, a unique identity. And this is why we call ourselves Ojiraman. We have purified ourselves and restored ourselves just as Asar and Aset purified themselves and restored themselves to rulership positions. So, when we talk about nationalism, the purification of nationalism, as Ojiraman, the purified nation, we recognize that an Oman, a nation, is a living, breathing entity. When you have a real, authentic nation, not just a collection of people like the whites and their offspring, calling themselves a nation. But when you have an authentic nation, because you're drawn together, coalesced together under the guidance of the Abosom and Nsamampo, the Orisha and Egungun, the Vodou and Kubito of your blood circles, and you naturally coalesce and blend blood circles and interface with the region of the Earth Mother upon which you operate, then you forge yourself into a nation governed by specific Abosom. The nation is a living entity governed by spirits, divinities, Abosom, Orisha. Just like your organs are entities governed by specific Abosom, but then they also give birth to cells that contribute to the functioning of the organ. And those cells work interdependently with regard to one another, but they also work to support the organ, the entity of which they are a component part. They don't lose sight of the fact instinctively that they're working as a component part of a larger entity that has its own function. We are cells within a greater organ, and that organ is an Oman, a nation. We live in harmony with one another, interact with one another. Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, African black people only, of course. We recognize we're component parts of an entity, a living, breathing entity, an Oman, a nation, governed by some forces in creation, forces of divine order. So therefore, we have a nationist perspective. Nationism, Amaniye, the purification of nationalism. So we solve problems and address issues and innovate from a nationist perspective. So this is what we deal with on AMANSEM, affairs of the nation. So what we're going to get into, and for those who came in a little bit later, if you have a question or comment in the chat room, you must log in as a user in order to interact. If you have a question or a comment on the phone line, simply hit the number 1 so that we can see that your hand is raised. So this particular episode of AMANSEM is the etymology and cosmology of conscious. From the true Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit African perspective. Of course, there's been a misappropriation of the term conscious and consciousness promoted by the whites and their offspring and their followers in the black community. The brainwashed followers in the black community, as well as the agents of the whites and their offspring within the black community, who of course are the enemies of our people. The whites and their offspring have put forward this notion of a false definition of what being conscious is, and it simply just means being aware, like being awake. If you're asleep and you're quote unquote unconscious of your surrounding, then when you open your eyes and you awaken, then you're quote unquote conscious, and that's all it is. And they have false pseudo definitions of what consciousness is and start talking about nonsense like unconditional love and all these other kinds of things. Our people initially, when we began to utilize the term conscious, as well as conscious community and so forth, when we first began to utilize that kind of terminology, it was rooted in our cosmology. And in reality, it is rooted in the cosmology, and we will prove that tonight. What it meant was people recognizing reality. They broke free from that comatose state. They began to reject the lies of misinformation regarding trustery, quote unquote history, culture, ancestral religion, and so forth. Every aspect of your life, when you awaken and realize you have been lied to on every level, then you begin to transform your life, every aspect of your life. When you recognize the whites and their offspring have been poisoning us through the foods and environmental racism and so forth, then you transform your diet. When you recognize the whites and their offspring have been controlling the minds of our people through promoting their false standards of beauty and therefore self-hatred amongst our people, and that self-hatred leads to abuse, it leads to anger that's brewing and constantly brewing up under the surface at all times, because we have self-hatred. When we look in the mirror, we hate what we see. We don't like our noses, don't like our lips, our hair, our body structure, our facial structure, our skin color, and so forth, our culture, our trustery. When we've been lied to about that, then we recognize the self-destructive nature of having that kind of mindset. When you awaken from that and recognize being melanin dominant is superior to melanin recessiveness, when we recognize the reality that the shapes of our noses and lips and our hair is original and real, and the whites and their offspring are degenerate, perverse, deviant, cancerous cells within the great body of Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit humanity that are simply slated for destruction, just like the cells in your body that become cancerous. They are isolated by the immune and lymphatic systems, killed, destroyed, and eradicated and eliminated from the body, repelled from the body, expelled from the body. They're not embraced. They don't sing kumbaya and try to bring the cancerous cells back together. The divine response of dealing with cancerous cells is to isolate them, kill them, and expel them, because they are deviant and they are degenerate and they have no place in the whites and their offspring, white Europeans, white Americans, white Asians, white Hindus, white Arabs, white pseudo-Native Americans who are just invading Asians, white Hispanics, white Latinos, white Latinas, and so forth. Non-black people are the whites and their offspring. We identify them as Odwirafo in the Akhan language, as well as the language of ancient Kemet. Chi means to hate, to repel. Adie means things, objects, deeds, and entities. So Odwirafo means those things that are hated, Chi, by the Abosom, the forces in nature, by the supreme being, Nyamewa, Amenet, and Amen. And Odwirafo is the designation for the group of people, Fo, who are divinely hated, divinely rejected, cancerous, that are to be exterminated. This is our designation for the whites and their offspring. They incarnate as spirits of disorder. So when we recognize who they actually are, when we recognize who we are, we no longer embrace the insanity of self-hatred. We embrace who we are fully because we know who we are. If we were bleaching our skin or using colored contacts or straightening out our hair or using weaves and all this other nonsense, all of that disappears when you become conscious in the real sense because you're aware of reality. You no longer carry the slave label that was branded upon us, our ancestresses and ancestors in the minds, the Adwini of our people, through this perverse language of the whites and their offspring. When you become conscious, you recognize that the names that you carry come from the forces in nature. The reason that Ra and Ra'et and Ka and Ka'et and Amin and Aminet and Ma'al and Ma'at and the various divinities have their names is based on the manner in which their spirits expand and contract through space, through creation. And as they move and contract according to their own vibrational frequencies, they generate a unique collection of sound vibrations. And when we replicate those sound vibrations with our vocal cords, we are enunciating the true names of these forces in creation. Your body is unique. No body has a physical body or a spiritual structure exactly like yours. When the life force energy of Ra and Ra'et circulates through your spirit body and your physical body, there's an emanation of a specific configuration of vibrations. No different than when you blow in a trumpet or blow in a tuba or blow in a trombone or different instruments. It's the same air being blown through, but because the shapes of the instruments are different, a collection of sound vibrations that emanate from each instrument is distinctive. When the life force energy circulates through us, there's Afuraitkaitnit people, and Afuraitkaitnit people only, of course, because Ra and Ra'et do not send their divine living energy through the whites and their offspring. But when that life force energy circulates through us, it's the same source. However, because it's moving through a specific structure that's unique to you, nobody has ever had your specific physical structure, unless you have an identical twin, and even then there's a slight variance. But nobody has ever had your specific physical structure, nor your spirit body structure, that unique structure, taking in that divine living energy and circulating it consistently. There's a specific configuration of sound vibrations emanating from you at all times, as long as you're living and breathing. And that specific configuration of sound vibrations based on the life force energy circulating through your structure, when you attune to that and replicate those sound vibrations with your vocal cords, you are enunciating the name that you came into the world with. And our naming practices are rooted in that reality. You don't have to be initiated into a system to receive a name. You're born with a name just by virtue of the fact that you exist, and life force energy is moving through your unique form. You're constantly emanating that collection of unique sound vibrations. Your name is constantly emanating from you. Ritual practice allows you to attune to that and recover that name. So in reality, when we engage that process, because we have become awakened and aware and conscious in the real sense, we can no longer respond to English names, Arabic names, Hindu names, Asian names, and all this other nonsense, because that collection of vibrations is discordant. It's no different than taking in food that's poisonous. You try to consume it, try to digest it, and it creates disorder within your digestive system, within your body. If you try to take in a collection of discordant sound vibrations by identifying with them, ingesting them, and then trying to operate based upon them, then it creates discordance within your spirit, discordance within your spirit body, discordance within your adwini, your mind, your capacity to process information properly, harmoniously, and then you make decisions on a consistent basis that are self-destructive. And as you make decisions, the manner in which you make decisions affect yourself, affect those who you are connected with, affects the Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit community as a whole in a destructive fashion, as well as opening up opportunities for the enemy to enter. No different than someone making bad decisions with regard to health. Their immune system becomes compromised, and now there are openings for bacteria that normally would be repelled. Now that bacteria can enter because you compromise your immunity by making bad decisions. When we constantly attempt to identify with a set of sound vibrations that are discordant, just as someone can sing and the sound vibrations can break a glass, sound vibrations have power. When you have a specific collection of sound vibrations that emanate from you consistently, and you hear them, or you speak them, or you contemplate them, even before you announce them. When you contemplate them in your own spirit, that energy begins to resonate as well. So when you think about your name, when you hear your name, when you speak your name and so forth, you're constantly re-energizing yourself, strengthening yourself, and realigning yourself. It is a formula. It is a ritual prayer every time you announce and enunciate your name, or hear someone else enunciate your name, or you contemplate or think about your name. But when you contemplate and think about a collection of sound vibrations coming from the language of the whites and their offspring, then you're constantly ingesting a set of vibrations that is discordant. That discordant energy creates discordance within your spirit, within your adwini, your mind, and then you make bad decisions. And of course, we see the effects of that. These are various expressions of what takes place when one becomes, quote unquote, conscious in the true sense. When we make good decisions with regard to our physical health and our spiritual health, our spiritual alignment, then we align with others who are operating on the same frequency. When we begin to purify ourselves through ahujira, self-purification, just like a tuning fork, if you make a tuning fork oscillate and then you place another tuning fork near it, it begins to oscillate at the same frequency. When you begin to purify yourself through ahujira, self-purification, physically as well as spiritually, then you begin to align and oscillate with others who are on the same page, and then you connect and you develop strong relationships, and you don't engage in self-destructive relationships in imitation of the whites and their offspring. You don't engage in promiscuity. You don't engage in, of course, sexual deviance like bisexuality, homosexuality. You don't engage in domestic abuse. You don't engage in all of that idiocy. You don't have negative relationships with your children, with other family members, and other Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people. You begin to forge relationships that's based on divine order, guided by the NHOMA for the ancestresses and ancestors, guided by the Abosom, the forces in nature who are connected to your blood circle. All these things manifest when people become conscious in the true sense. But then you have Negroes who attempted to change the definition of conscious. Conscious means that you can embrace the whites and their offspring and marry crackers, but you can still be about black empowerment if you marry crackers. That's what agents within the community would like you to believe. But they're getting their orders from the whites and their offspring, and they're willingly taking those orders and implementing those orders within the community. Agents need to be eradicated, eliminated. Then you have brainwashed individuals who would like to satisfy their own misguided lusts, their desires, ignorance, self-destructive inclinations that they have not yet purged. So they will rather rationalize their idiocy by trying to make consciousness mean that you simply paper over your lusts and your ignorance and say that's being conscious. And anybody who gives you some real information, they try to denigrate the reality so they can continue to embrace the lust, continue to be drug addicts, continue to engage in promiscuity, continue to engage in domestic abuse against those who they're in connection with, continue to lay up with the whites and their offspring, continue to make self-destructive decisions and so forth in life, economically and politically and socially and so forth. All these different things they seek to rationalize, so they try to denigrate the title conscious or even term conscious community and so forth. This is what's taking place today. Then, of course, you have the agents of the whites in their offspring who are sent in to try to include all manner of idiocy into a quote-unquote conscious community. Originally, of course, when you practice ancestral religion, ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance, that's the definition of consciousness. And we're going to go into the cosmology that undergirds that. That means if anybody who's engaged in pseudo-religious practice, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hebrewism, Moorishism, Rastafarianism, Hinduism, Arabism, Asian pseudo-mysticism, Sufism, Kabbalism, Hermeticism, pseudo-metaphysics, humanism, interracialism, dissexuality, extraterrestrialism, drug addict spirituality, all of these idiotic practices rooted in fictional cartoon character deities and personages who never existed of any race or in any form whatsoever, including Allah and Yahweh, Buddha, Brahman, Abraham, Isaac, Ishmael, Solomon, Sheba, Menelik, Jesus, Yeshua ben Pandera, Muhammad, Moses, Aaron, all of these characters are fictional cartoon characters who never existed of any form or in any race or of any race whatsoever. Anybody engaged in any expression of that, including Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity, all of that idiocy, any expression of that is the absolute definition of being unconscious. We are born into the world as Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people with ancestral religion, meaning we have a deity that dwells in the head region, a male divinity if you're male, a female divinity if you're female. We have patriclan and matriclan divinities that are assigned to us pre-incarnation. So when we are born into the womb, we are naturally aligned to a certain inclinations, functions in creation, just like your cells are part of certain organs and organ systems, and they have natural functions to execute. We are children of the Abosom, Orisha, Vodou, Ntoro, Ntoro 2, misnomer Neteru, Neter 2. These are the organs within the great divine body of the Supreme Being. We are the cells. When we support as cells the organs of who are our direct parents, we're supporting the Supreme Being at the same time. When your liver cell serves liver functions or serves as parent deity, the liver is also serving you at the same time, the great being. When your heart cells serve and support heart functions, their parent deity, the heart, which is a living entity, then they're serving you, the great being, at the same time. When we as children of specific Abosom or Orisha divinities, and Akhan, in Akhan the term Abosom means deities, forces in nature, goddesses and gods and so forth, we serve Abosom who are our direct parents. We're serving the great Supreme Being, Nyamewa Nyame, called Amanet and Amen and ancient Kemet. We're serving the great being at the same time. So we are born into the world assigned to specific Abosom. We have natural inclinations to operate in a specific form and capacity. We are born into the world with ancestral religion as part of our nature. Therefore, if we engage in any other pseudo-religious practice, that is the definition of being unconscious. If someone tries to embrace a secular nationalism, that is the definition of unconscious. A black nationalism separated from ancestral religion is the definition of being unconscious and unaware. Embracing a pan-Africanism that's devoid of ancestral religious practice rooted in your direct blood circle. Not somebody going to the continent paying thousands of dollars to pick up some shrines and come back over here and have some, quote-unquote elders on the continent controlling your moves over here and so forth. That's not ancestral religion. We've maintained our ancestral religion through our blood circles right here in the Western Hemisphere for hundreds of years and have passed that down as hoodoo, the Akhan tradition, juju, which is a Yoruba tradition, voodoo, which is the Fon and Ebe tradition, Wanga, which is the Ovambo, and other Bantu traditions, in the Gullah tradition and so forth, Gri, which is the Bambara tradition and so forth. We've maintained our ancestral religious practices born of our blood circles. We're not dependent on anybody outside of our blood circles in the Caribbean or on the continent for our ancestral religious practice that is inborn, innate, and intrinsic. So if you're dealing with a pan-Africanism, which is secular, devoid from ancestral religion, that's the definition of unconscious. So we're talking about real consciousness. The whites in our offspring can't give you a real definition of consciousness because they don't have that kind of definition. So let's get into the actual definition, the etymology and cosmology of conscious, so you can finally understand where it actually comes from and the cosmological foundation that gave birth to the term, which the whites and offspring, of course, do not understand. And the vast majority of those who claim consciousness or claim to have some understanding or be experts or elders in African culture and religion and so forth do not understand either, and therefore have been misinforming our people for decades very often. So first we're going to look at the etymology of the term conscious, and then we're going to show its origins. If you go to online, Online or any etymology dictionary, you can go to the University of Texas, they have that European lexicon and so forth. You can go to a number of different sources. If you look at conscious, and they'll talk about, in fact, we're going to do it two ways. If you look at the term conscious, you can go to Etymline here. An adjective, knowing, privy to, from Latin, conscious, knowing, aware. From consciere, see, conscience. Then you go to conscience to look what they say dealing with conscience. Conscience, early 13th century, from the Old French, conscience, innermost thoughts, desires, intentions, feelings, from the Latin conscientia, knowledge within oneself, sense of right, a moral sense. From conscientum, the nominative of conscience, present participle of consciere, to be mutually aware, from cum, which means with or thoroughly, and sire or seer, to know. So cum is that prefix meaning with or thoroughly, and then sire, to know. The root sire, S-C-I-R-E, meaning to know, is the root of the term science or science. So then we look at the term science, because it's science or conscience, which is also the root of conscious. So look at the term, we already know what the term con means. In fact, let's look at the term con real quick. That prefix, we're going to do this real fast. You can get a sense of that. You click on com, C-O-M. It's a word forming, usually meaning with or together. From the Latin com, C-O-M, archaic form of the classical Latin cum, C-U-M, together with, in combination. From the Proto-Indo-European root com, which means beside, near, by, or with. So together, with, and so forth. When it's before certain consonants, C-O-M, com, as in community and so forth. When it's before certain consonants, it is assimilated from C-O-M. It can become C-O. It can be C-O-R. But if it's before the consonant, for example, before the consonant S, it's no longer C-O-M and then S. It becomes C-O-N. It's assimilated to C-O-N. So C-O-M switches from C-O-M to C-O-N. So instead of saying com-chus, it becomes conscious. With or by, together, and so forth. So that's the com or the con part. Then you have science. Mid-14th century, what is known, knowledge of something, acquired by study, information, also assurance, knowledge, certitude, certainty. It's from the root science, S-C-I-E-N-S. Talks about the genitive, scientist, intelligent, skilled, the present participle of sire, S-C-I-R-E, which means to know. Here's the key. Then they say probably, originally, to separate one thing from another, to distinguish. Related to scindere, to cut, divide. And it's from the Proto-Indo-European root, not SKAI, like S-C-I-R-E, but SKAI, or SKAI, S-K-E-I, meaning to cut or to split. So the root sire, which is the root of science, meaning to know, it comes from SKAI or SKAI, meaning to cut or to split. So Khan, meaning to come together, and sire, meaning to know, come together or with or by or near, meaning to come together or the coming together or knowing or coming with. Khan, sire, to know, with knowledge. So conscience or conscious means with knowledge, to become aware with knowledge. But what does sire mean, or skyer mean, or sky, the root? To cut or to split. And that has something to do with knowledge. They say probably originally sky means to separate one thing from another. That's why the Proto-Indo-European root means to cut or to split, sky, and it became skyer or sire, a science, and conscience means to know, to understand, one with knowledge and so forth. But they say probably originally. Why do they say probably originally? That it means separate, means separate one thing from another, like you dissect a animal in science so that you can understand and examine, separating things, dissecting, cutting, splitting. As far as the whites and our offspring can see, if sky means to cut or split, it becomes skyer, a sire, a science, and so forth. You cut or split something to examine it so you can gain some information about it, and then you can calm science, or conscience, or conscience, or conscious with knowledge. You can be someone with knowledge or understanding because you cut or split something. That's why they say probably originally, but they don't know for sure. The root sky is key, to cut or split. Where does it come from? These Proto-Indo-European terms are not originally Proto-Indo-European terms. That is the root of all the whites and their offspring languages. Going back a few thousand years, they will say the Proto-Indo-European language family or phylum is the foundation of all Indo-European languages. European languages from all Europe all the way into India. Thousands of years ago, there was a parent, quote-unquote, language that gave birth to the various languages you find all over Europe, all the way into the so-called Near East, all the way through to India. And they'll say this is the root. But in reality, when you look at these roots, they're not Proto-Indo-European. They come from our languages. Of course, tens of thousands of years ago, we migrated from Afuraitkaitnit up into northern or southern Europe. And we settled, of course, we kept talking when we were in southern Europe, so those root terms still exist. And that small percentage of our people were forced out of the community and were drawn up into northern Eurasia and ended up in northern Eurasia during the last ice age. Once the ice began to melt, they began to spill back after they had been engaged in incest for thousands of years in northern Eurasia, coming back as albinos. Of course, incest greatly increases the incidence of albinism, as well as autoimmune deficiencies such as vitiligo and so forth, and other degenerate diseases and mutations. So they come back devoid of color, but also devoid of that spirit, that soul, which we're going to get into. So, of course, they still have those root words, but they don't know the origins of them. So the whites and their offspring say the Proto-Indo-European language phylum is the foundation of all languages in Europe and quote-unquote parts of Asia. So when they look at the term sky, meaning to cut or split, and comb or comb, meaning with or to come together, this is as far as they can go. But these terms come from our ancient languages. So let's go to our ancient languages and see what does it mean. You go to the language of ancient Kemet, you'll find the roots of these terms. Now, comb or ko, meaning to come together, to bring together with, or bring with together and so forth. That comes from the ancient term ka. The soul is called ka, male term, kat, the female term, or kaet, the female term, in ancient Kemet. When you look at the actual medut, the hieroglyph, it is two arms, the shoulders, and then the two arms raised up, and they're reaching out, pulling the divine living energy into the individual. The same term in Akhan, ka, is dealing with the soul, also kra, and it means to touch. So when you look in our Akhan dictionary, ka means to touch, to come or be in, to bring into contact with, to join. When you look at the exact same term, Ka in ancient Kemet, it's the soul, and what the soul does, it has the two shoulders with the two open hands joining together to touch, to come, to bring into contact with. That's why the two hands are reaching out, pulling something in, joining something in, bringing something into contact with, come together. That's why kom and ko and kon in the Proto-Indo-European language family means with, or to come together or bring into contact with, and so forth. It comes from this term. Whites and offspring know the sound kom or kom or kon means with or to come together, but they don't know why that collection of sounds means to come together. They can't tell you that. They just know that kom, or that means to come together or bring something together. But we have the actual cosmology in ancient Kemet with the actual sound. Ka means to bring something together, and that's the function of the soul. But the actual image is the two hands reaching out to bring something together. What is the Ka bringing together? What is the Ka? It's pulling the Ba, the divine living energy, into the physical and spiritual vehicle of the individual. So we have to talk about what the Ka is, because that's the first portion of Kan Chas. It comes from Ka. So what is the Ka? And when you have a definition of what the Ka and the Ka'et are, then you have an understanding what consciousness means in the real sense, and not in the pseudo sense coming from the whites and offspring or misinformed Negroes in the culture, or pretending to be in the culture, misusing the term and identifying all kinds of clowns within a conscious community, and then denigrating and disparaging the term in and of itself. So it's not a European term. Kon, meaning with or coming together, comes from Ka, from ancient Kemet. Ka is the soul. The Ka, the Ka'et, is the soul. Difference between the term soul in our culture and the whites and their offspring is for us, for reality, the soul is actually a deity. It is a male deity dwelling in the head region of Afurakani males. It is a female divinity, the Ka'et or Kat, dwelling in the head region of females. It is a divinity. So when someone makes their transition, when you die, you make your transition, your spirit separates from your body. Funerary services take place, the body is buried. If you did what you needed to do while you were here on earth, you make a transition, you go to the ancestral realm to live amongst your spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors of your direct blood circle. If you're engaged in self-destructive activity and disorder, and you're full of anxiety and negative energy and so forth, you'll be repelled from the community of ancestresses and ancestors. You'll be one of those spirits that are earthbound, hanging around the house where you died in, irritating people and so forth, hanging around the bridge where you jumped off and committed suicide, and your spirit is still hanging around there like a homeless spirit, just like a homeless person hanging around a bridge and so forth, hanging around the place where you got shot, hanging around the senior's home that you died in and so forth, hanging around those areas for 10 years, 30 years, 50 years, 100 years and so forth as a discordant spirit full of anxiety. And every time someone comes in the area where your spirit is, they become overcome with this negative feeling of energy and melancholy and so forth that's emanating from you because you were engaged in disordered activity, self-destructive activity, and you were repelled from the ancestral community. But if you did what you needed to do, just on a basic level while you were living here in the world, then you're accepted and drawn in and embraced by the NHOMA, the spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors of your direct blood circle. And you live in that community for 100 years or more. But when it's time for you to return, when your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren and great-great-great-grandchildren that you've been watching over for the past 100+ years as they grew and developed, for example, in America, and some of them, when they pour libation and communicate with you and you guide them periodically on good decisions and the best way to handle certain things, and you come to them in dreams, and you come to them at shrines, come to them during spirit possession and so forth, at some point, one of your great-great-great-great-great-granddaughters grows up, she gets married, they copulate, it's time for you to return. You're drawn away from the ancestral realm. You're a spirit, you're an ancestor, an ancestress. You're drawn away from the ancestral realm, but before you're drawn into the womb, you're drawn first up to Aminet and Amen, Nyamewa, Nyame, Awu and Lisa, the great mother and great father. And they direct a divinity. They direct a specific deity to take up residence in your head region, and it installs itself in your head region, a force in nature. A male divinity if you're male, a female divinity if you're female. That is your Ka if you're male, your Kaet or Kat if you're female. Called Kra in Akhan and Krawa, the female. It's called Ori Inu, the inner Ori, the inner head in the Yoruba tradition. It's called the Se Lido in Vodun, the Vodou that dwells in the head region. It's called the Chi in Igbo, the Arusi or the deity that dwells in the head region. They direct that divinity to take up residence in your head region, the head region of your spirit body. And encoded within that divinity is the function you are to execute in creation. What kind of cell within the great divine body are you going to be? If you're naturally sent into the world to be an immune system cell in our man's great divine body, when you come into the world, you're going to be naturally inclined towards immune system functions. You're going to be naturally inclined towards restoring order by eradicating the enemy. You're going to be naturally inclined towards policing activities in a traditional sense, martial arts type of activities in a traditional sense, warfare, fashioning metal implements and so forth in a traditional sense. You're going to be dealing with defense, immunity in the community and so forth. You're going to have a natural inclination towards those kinds of activities because you're an immune system cell within the great divine body. You're a child of the immune system divinity, so that kind of divinity takes up residence in your head region and guides you throughout the course of your life. If you're a child of a different kind of divinity, then that kind of divinity takes up residence in your head. Maybe you're a healer or healeress, part of that excretory system within the body, then you're naturally inclined towards procuring plant life and mineral life to heal our people, learn the properties of plant life and mineral life, be able to communicate with them through the practice of hoodoo and so forth, learn to extract their essences and their properties so you can bring about a balance, restore balance within a diseased state. So you have that natural inclination because the divinity that governs you has taken up residence in your head region and it's always pulling you in that direction. So whatever kind of cell you are to be within the great divine body, whatever function you are to serve, the blueprint of your function is wired within that divinity and takes up residence in your head region. Now you are a spirit that has a Ka. If you're male, you're a spirit that has a Kaet if you're female. No different than your physical body. You have a smaller physical body in your head region called the brain, and it has the blueprints for everything that must take place within the body. It is an entity, its own entity that's regulating the functions of the other organs and glands within the body. It is the leader, it is the blueprint, and so forth. Wired within the cerebral cortex and cerebellum and so forth are all of that, the blueprints or designs for how you are to function and how they are all to function in the body. In the same fashion, you have a spirit body. You are a spirit, you have a spirit body. But within the head region of your spirit body is a smaller spirit body, your spirit's brain, which is your Ka, if you're male, or Kaet, if you're female. And wired within that force in nature is a specific function you are to execute in creation. So once you're assigned that and it's installed in the head region, you leave Inyamewa Inyame and go back to the ancestral realm to await Bebra, rebirth, reincarnation. And as your great-great-great-great-granddaughter and her husband copulate, they draw your spirit into the womb. You enter into the womb, and then you gestate for 40 weeks, and then you're born into the world. As you grow and develop, divination is done. Your parents communicate with the abosom, communicate with them, the deities and ancestral spirits ritually. They communicate with that deity dwelling in your head region to ask that divinity what your function in creation is. They learn from that divinity and the ancestresses and ancestors of your blood circle what your function is, and they give you a name that carries the energy of that function, that unique configuration of sound vibrations that resonate and align with the energy of that function. And they give you that proper name and so forth. So every time it's heard and spoken and contemplated, that unique formula that unique configuration of sound vibrations that's actually emanating from your spirit is returned to you and it stimulates you to execute your function in creation. They give you that kind of name and you grow and develop in that fashion. So you have divinity dwelling in the head region. Throughout the course of your life, you feel a strong pull in your head region spiritually towards certain kinds of thoughts, intentions, and actions, and a strong repulsion from other kinds of thoughts, intentions, and actions. Eventually, that strong pull becomes actual communication, where you sit at the shrine for your Ka and your Ka, and you can communicate with that deity. That deity will show himself or herself to you and communicate directly with you. Initially, it's felt as a pull, but even children sometimes can see that deity and they will tell you, I saw this divinity. I saw this male force, I saw this female force, and they told me this, or he told me that, or she told me this. When you're engaged in culture and there are culturists, they know exactly who that divinity is, what his or her name is, and they learn to invoke that divinity consistently. But before you get to that kind of receptivity, especially us living in this culture, and we're not involved in culture very often, ancestral culture, we feel that pull in the head region. You may be driving down the street in your normal everyday movements, and you feel a strong pull to make a left turn at the street you normally would never make a left turn down. And then you may reject that strong urge and continue driving like you normally do, and then you come in contact with a situation where somebody is running in the middle of the street, shooting at other people, and cars are getting hit and so forth. Your Kra was trying to direct you away from that information because your Ka, the divinity, saw what was unfolding before you did and directed you away from that. There are a number of different things. Some people say that was my first mind. In reality, for Afuraitkaitnit people, typically that's the Ka or the Ka'et. Sometimes you have an ancestor, an ancestress who will give you that kind of direction as well, but they're also understanding what your Ka is trying to inform you about, and you're not listening to the Ka, so your ancestor or ancestress will direct you in the same fashion. Of course, you have another option where if you're out of harmony with order and you're receptive to discarnate relatives and non-relatives, you have a criminal type spirit trying to give you bad information, and then you say, I felt like something told me something and I went ahead and did it and made a bad decision. But when you're doing basic normal activity, you're not engaged in self-destructive behavior, you haven't lowered your immune system, your spiritual immunity, that pull in your head is typically your Ka or your Ka'et directing you towards certain activities and away from others, directing you towards certain kinds of medicines and individuals that you may need to come in contact with. You come down with a specific illness, you go to doctors and so forth, they can't deal with anything. They may say, you're a female, you need to have a hysterectomy and so forth. We can't deal with the tumors, the fibroid tumors in any other fashion. You consult with your Ka, your Ka'et. Your Ka directs you to go to a specific store at a specific time of day that you normally never go to. You go to that store, and then you happen to run into somebody who gets in front of you in line, who just happens to be in the city for 1 hour, and they just needed to stop at that store for one particular item that they couldn't find somewhere else, and you all cross paths at that specific hour, and they happen to have information for somebody in your region who specializes in utilizing herbal medicine to get rid of fibroid tumors and has a 20-year history of being successful with that, and you get that information and you heal yourself by connecting with that individual who's a healeress. Because you listen to your Ka or your Ka'et, the divinity was able to tell you, they could see what was unfolding in creation, they can see the child of another divinity, that individual who's the child of another divinity. They communicate with the other force in nature and can see when that individual is going to be at that store at the specific time and make sure you get there and intersect at the time. These events are synchronized with the divinity that dwells in the head region. We purify our heads so we can have more clear communication. We have shrines for the Ka, the Ka'et, in the Akhan tradition, the Kra, the Krawa, the Kradim Bosom shrines, or Nkomre. In the Yoruba tradition, they have a shrine, an Ibori shrine, where you sit down and communicate with your Ori. In the Vodun tradition, they have shrines for the Se Lido, so you can communicate with that divinity in your own space, specific focused communication. In the Igbo tradition, they have shrines specifically for the Chi, the deity that dwells in your head region, and so forth. All the various traditions we establish a shrine for the Ka where we go to that space at a specific time, in a specific manner, to have intensive communication, to magnify that communication we have with that divinity in the head region. All shrines are magnifiers of energy. You can communicate with your Ka wherever you're at, but you can magnify that energy. No different than a microscope. When the sun is shining on the ground and there are dry leaves on the ground, they're just warm. If you take a microscope and place it between the sunlight and the leaves, it magnifies the sunlight, and then once it comes through the microscope, then the leaves can combust. All the microscope did was magnify the energy that's already streaming from the sun. A shrine, whether it's ancestral or a deity shrine, magnifies the energy of the abosom that are born with you and walk with you every day. And the Nsamanfo, the ancestresses and ancestors who walk with you every day. This is why we establish shrines, to magnify that energy so we can align with it in an optimal fashion. And we do that in a ritual space. So, the Ka is the divinity dwelling in the head region. It is a deity, meaning it's a divinity and embodiment of divine order. It's always in harmony with order. It's always leading you towards thoughts, intentions, and actions every moment of every day that are in harmony with your divine function and thus in harmony with divine order, and it's always directing you to repel any thoughts, any intentions, any actions that will place you out of harmony with divine order. This is what deities are. There's no such thing as deities who act crazy and are self-destructive and criminal and so forth. That's idiotic. The deities are the embodiments of divine order and creation. So every Afuraitkaitnit person, and only Afuraitkaitnit people, have these deities that dwell within our head region. The whites and their offspring do not have that. They're like a person without a head, a body without a brain, a spirit without a crowd. That's what distinguishes them from us. And that means all white Europeans, white Americans, white Asians, white Hindus, white pseudo-Native Americans, white Latinos, white Hispanics, all of these non-black people. They have a spiritual degeneration, spiritual decapitation, and this is why they manifest and operate and interact in the world as spiritually discordant from the time they are born, even pre-incarnation into the world. No exception to that reality. So, when you have a divinity, a deity, a force in nature that guides you in thoughts, intentions, and actions every moment of every day throughout the course of your life towards the kinds of activities that you should engage in that are harmonious, no different than your brain is constantly sending signals to the various organs and glands about how they should operate in an optimal fashion every moment of every day throughout the course of your entire life. You have that kind of force in nature operating with you, and when you align with it, you're in alignment with the Ka, the Ka'et, the first aspect of the term Khan, or conscious. So the first part of that term is dealing with the divinity that governs your head. So if you're conscious in the real sense, you're aligning with your Ka and your Ka, or your Ka'et. If you're male or female, the Ka or the Ka'et. So any conscious activity must be an expression of you aligning with a deity, a divine force in nature, always guiding your thoughts, intentions, and actions in harmony with divine order. If your thoughts, intentions, and actions and the manifestation of your behavior is not reflective of divine order, then you can't identify yourself as conscious or Ka'et or conscious. So that's the first portion. Then you deal with the chus or conscience, science. We said the root of science is sire or SKAI or SKAI, the Proto-Indo-European root. What the SKAI means to separate, divide, and they believe that the separation or division means to separate things so you can study and examine them. They say that's probably originally what it means, but they're not sure. So let's get into that term SKAI and see what it actually means. Is it a Proto-Indo-European term? No, it's not. Why does SKAI mean to separate or divide in the Proto-Indo-European language phylum? When they say that's what it means, why does it mean that? Why does it mean separate or divide? Why doesn't boo mean separate or divide? Why does it have to be SKAI, SKAI or SKAI? Why does that collection of sound vibrations mean to separate and divide and have something to do with knowledge, sire, and later science? Why can't some other sound vibrations mean to separate or divide? If you ask a European, why does that mean that in a Proto-Indo-European language phylum, all they can say is, well, sky means to separate, divide, and has something to do with knowledge. We don't know why. When you go to the language of ancient Kemet, we have the exact same term, but there's a cosmological foundation for why that collection of sound vibrations means that. And even the Medut, the hieroglyph, proves that. So when you have the actual Medut that represents that separation or dividing, and then you have the actual same SKAI with the same sound vibrations, the phonology plus the actual symbol, and then we get into the cosmology that gave birth to the symbol. Now you see we are the originators of the symbol. We don't just have the word and the consonants and the vowels and the sound and the meaning, but we also have the symbol, and we also have the cosmology related to deities that gave birth to the symbol. This is how we prove where these terms come from. It's not just the sound, it's not just the structure, it's not just the meaning, but there's also the cosmology, and it's always tied to deities. So, where does the term sky come from? The term sky in Kemet does have to do with separation and splitting, because the term sky is the term for a plow, and also meaning to plow. So when you're plowing something, whether you have a large plow that's pulled by an animal like oxen, you have a hand plow, which in English would be called a whole agricultural tool, but a plow, you're splitting, you're separating, you're dividing. You take the plow and it overturns the soil. You create rows and rows of divides or splits, divisions. Why are you overturning the soil, the topsoil? When you make that split with the sky, the thing that divides or splits, then you reach down into the nourishing aspect of the soil. And when you make that split, then you can plant seeds in the split, in the divide, because that's where the nourishment is. When you plant seeds in the divide, then you cover them over with the soil, and they can reach down into the nourishing aspect of the soil. And when you plant those seeds, what is birthed or sprouts from that are the fruits of your labor, and you can feed from that, and you can develop and grow and operate based on that. So you have to split first so you can reach that which is nourishing after you make the split or the separation, and then you can plant the seeds, plant the information. It's covered over, so therefore you can eventually harvest that which you planted. You can learn from that which you planted. You went down deep, put something in there to germinate and root so you could reach down deep in the darkness of the soil where all the nutrients are to grab those nutrients, or grab that information. And once that information is grabbed out by the roots, then the sprouts break through the soil, and then what was down deep within the darkness rises up and shows its face to the sun, and then you harvest that, you consume it, and you become empowered by it. So the sky is the beginning. The sky becoming the psi or the sire or the science leads to quote-unquote knowledge. The splitting eventually leads to knowledge. The plowing, the splitting, the sky leads to your capacity to plant seeds in the nutrient soil. If you just had the topsoil, you just drop some seeds on top of the soil, they may not sink in and you won't have any crops. You have to overturn the soil first, so you have to first create a split, a separation. Now that which is nourishing is exposed. Now you can plant the seeds in that split and cover them over. Then the seeds can germinate. The roots go down deep in the darkness to grab everything that you're looking for, the nutrients, and then they bring what was deep in the soil up, and they grow and develop eventually the full flowering of the plant after the sprouting occurs, and then you capture the full flowering of what you have sown. You reap that, you harvest it, you consume it, and you become empowered and healed by it and strengthened by it. This is the cosmological foundation of that connection of sky to separate skyer, science, science, a conscience, and conscious, separate and so forth, so you can plant the seed, so you can get that information. You have to plow first. You have to sky first. So there's a connection between the ka, the divine divinity that dwells in the head region that has all of the information you need to execute your function in the world. But first you must plow. First you must engage in ritual, to engage into a separation or a splitting. When we engage in ritual prayer, that is a splitting. The term for prayer in Akhan is mpai. Pai literally means to split. Like you take an axe and split a tree and so forth, or lightning splitting a tree. When you say mpai or prayer, that literally means to split. You create an incision or a split, a gateway into the spirit realm so you can open that gateway and enter in, and then you can grab that information. That's what ritual prayer is. The same thing with the term Ntoro, divinity, neter, and so forth, and we go over that in our book, Kemet, Kena, Ntoro, the Black Nation and Divinity. When we engage in ritual, we create a split, an incision, opening into the spirit realm. When we go to our shrines and so forth and spirit possession takes place, first you create a split with the ritual prayer, drumming, dancing, whatever ritual means, you engage that process, and opening takes place. The Abosom now can come through that opening and possess. The Nsamafo, the ancestral spirits, can come through that opening and possess. And you can go through that opening and connect with the ancestresses and ancestors in the spirit realm. You can connect with the Abosom, the forces in nature, the Orisha in the spirit realm, and so forth, and grab that knowledge. So you plow first, you create the split, there's an opening, you plant the seeds, you seek, when you're planting seeds, it's no different than casting shells for divination because you're seeking something. And once you cast those shells, then the Abosom takes those shells, manipulate them in a certain fashion, and then they go deep and get that knowledge for you and give it to you and so forth, and you reap that. So that plowing in the physical sense, how we empower ourselves physically through agriculture. Plowing in the ritual sense is opening that split through ritual prayer, ritual incantation, and so forth, so that we can plant those seeds and draw out that divine wisdom from the spirit realm. This is what the SKAI, which leads to psi or sire or science, is talking about. And that's what the psi has to do with. But there's even more information. Because when you look in the Runu Pert Imheru, the so-called Book of the Dead, there is a section, chapter 110, that deals with that plowing. It's a specific section dealing with that SKAI, dealing with that plowing. And it's very key to the Ka and SKAI, or Kan SKAI, Kan Psi, Kan Science, or Conscience, or Conscious, and so forth. The divinity dwelling in your head region, always guiding you towards thoughts, intentions, and actions that are in harmony with divine order. And you engage the process of aligning with that divinity through that plowing, through that split, that seeding, through that germination, rooting, sprouting, and harvesting, and reaping, and sowing and reaping, and so forth. So we're going to go to that chapter 110 from the Runu Pert Imheru, the so-called Book of the Dead, misnomer Book of the Dead, and see what they have to say about this notion of plowing. That is very key to everything we're talking about. The text says, here begin the chapters of the Sekhet, Hetep, and the chapters of coming forth by day, and of going forth into and coming out of the spirit realm, the ancestral realm, of coming to the Sekhet Aru, the divine field of offerings, and the Sekhet Hetep is the divine field of peace. That's the title of the ancestral realm. Of being in Sekhet Hetep, the mighty land, the lady of winds, and having power there, of becoming an Aku there, meaning an illumined ancestral spirit, of plowing there, of reaping there, of eating there, of drinking there. This is the title of this chapter. So you can become an Aku, an illuminated ancestor or ancestors. The term Aku or Akut is the title of a spiritually cultivated ancestor and ancestors in the ancient language. Just like Nananom Nsamafo, the spiritually cultivated Nsamafo or ancestors and ancestors. The Egungun are the spiritually cultivated Egun. The ones who lived in harmony with divine order, lived in harmony with their Ka and Kayet throughout the course of their lives, and they became a standard upon which the people would emulate. And once they made their transition, after they had become Nananom Mpanyimfo, spiritually cultivated elders and eldresses, because they consistently lived in harmony with divine order without profaning themselves, then when they made their transition, they moved into the class of Nananom Nsamafo, the spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors. Some people die and they just become Nsamafo, ancestresses and ancestors. Some of them were nice people. They weren't necessarily spiritually cultivated, but they were all right. So they lived in the ancestral community. But a smaller percentage become Nananom Nsamafo, spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors, because they were consistent with regards to living in harmony with divine order. And because they were consistent, once they made their transition, they become assistants to Nyamewa and Ame. They become endowed with an increased Tumi, or divine power, to assist us, their direct blood descendants on earth, that guide us throughout the course of our lives. Because they lived on earth as part of our clan, the manner in which people in our clans must harmonize in this region of the Earth Mother, our dietary taboos associated with our clans and our social taboos and others and so forth, the manner in which people of our clan operate harmoniously in the world is different than the way people of other clans operate harmoniously. Even on a mundane level, you may be allergic to certain foods because you're part of a clan that you are all allergic to that food, so you need to get the same proteins from a different food source than somebody else who can eat that food because they're from a different clan. The same thing spiritually and politically and economically and so forth, the manner in which we must operate in the world based on our clan affiliation in a harmonious way. Only those who are part of that clan and were successful in living and functioning in the world as part of that clan, that specific, with that specific spiritual signature, they're the ones of your blood circle who can show you how to live in harmony with order and overcome specific obstacles and even avoid a bunch of nonsense because they navigated their way in the world as part of that clan. So when they engage that process and they're successful like that, and they pass that weighing of the heart with Ma'at in the judgment scene, and of course we did our broadcast where after you pass the judgment scene with Ma'at, then you go to a judgment scene with the male god Ma'ah, and you have to pass a judgment scene with him. And then you can be adjudicated as divinely ordered Ma'akeru or Ma'atkeru. So you become one of the Aku, the Akutu, the illuminated ones. Aku means illuminated, shining, brilliant, but also wise or wise ones. In a physical sense, when someone is living in harmony with order and they have a strong spirit, then their aura is strong. They have a vibrant aura. People see them clairvoyantly. Their aura is strong, it is powerful, it is bright. Same thing when they make their transition. If you're sick or weak or engaged in self-destructive activity, your aura is small, dim, and it's weak. When you make your transition, you're an ancestral spirit with a small, dim, weak aura. But if you're a vibrant, powerful, harmonious individual, then you have a vibrant, powerful, shining aura. So you're literally an Aku or Aku, and a shining one, an illuminated one. But it also has to do with wisdom, intelligence, because you lived in harmony with your Ka. Your Ka has the divine force in your head region. So therefore, just like when you're outside in the darkness when the sun sets, if you're in the south and there are no street lights, when the sun sets, you can't see your hand in front of your face. But if there's a full moon out, then the illumination from the full moon can help you guide your way and navigate your way through the darkness so you don't injure yourself when you're trying to find your way through a path and can avoid, animals and so forth that could be a negative situation. In the same fashion, the Aku, the Akutu, the illuminated ones, the shining ones, they live in harmony with divine order, so they have that capacity to attune to what is in harmony with order and direct you in that fashion. So when you find yourself in the darkness of ignorance, an illuminated ancestor and ancestress, one of the Nananom and Samampo or a Gungun or Kavito, they can show you the path for you so that you can make good decisions and avoid negative consequences that you don't even have to fall into because we have a track record. We don't need to keep making the same mistakes over and over and over again every generation. One of the benefits of wisdom and the accumulated wisdom of a clan over millions of years is we know what to avoid, so we don't have to keep having the same trials and errors. We can go through life and avoid many, many negative experiences because we've already been through that, and they can say, listen, don't go that direction because you will suffer in this way. You don't need to waste a week or a month or a year suffering like that. Go in this direction. So you can become an Aku and Akutu, one of the spiritually illuminated ones, the shining ones, many ancestresses and ancestors who lead the way, who lived in harmony with order. So the chapter title is dealing with that. the beginning of the Sekhet Hetep, the divine field of peace or offering. The term Hetep, meaning peace or offerings. Also in Akhan, Chete, which means a gift or a donation or an offering. This is what we're talking about. There's also peace, because once you're given that offering, ritually, a ritual offering, it brings a balance, equilibration, and quote-unquote peace and so forth. So the field of peace, the divine fields of peace, the Sekhet Hetep, this is the beginning of the chapters of the Sekhet Hetep, and the chapters of coming forth by day. Going into and coming out from this ancestral realm, coming to the Sekhet Aru, the field of divine food within the divine field of peace, the ancestral realm, being in Sekhet, the Sekhet Hetep, the mighty land, the lady of winds, of having power there, of becoming an Akhu and Akhut, as spiritually cultivated ancestors there, of plowing there, of reaping there, of eating there, of drinking there. Let's go to that text and see what they have to say about this notion of plowing and so forth, and how it's related to Ka and conscious and so forth. And we're not going to read the whole text because it's a very long section, a very long chapter, but we'll get the most salient points. So it says, behold me now, for I make this mighty boat to travel over the lake of Hetep. Traveling the boat, crossing the waters to get to the ancestral realm. This lake of Hetep, and I brought it away with might from the palace of Shu. The domain of his stars grow young and renew in its former strength. I have brought the boat into the lakes thereof, so that I may come forth into the cities thereof, and I have sailed into their divine city of Hetep. And behold, it is because I, even I, am at peace with his seasons, and with his guidance, and with his territory, and with the company of the deities who are his firstborn. He makes the two divine fighters, Heru and Set, to be at peace with those who watch over the living ones, whom he has created in fair form, and brings peace with him. He makes peace over two diviners, or two combatants. So the individual right now is talking about, he got into the sacred boat after he made his transition. He wants to go to the ancestral realm, sail over the waters, get to the ancestral realm, and he wants to arrive in the city within the Sekhet Hetep, the city of Hetep. Hetep is the name of a deity. There's a god named Hetep, and there's a goddess named Hetepet, who govern the Sekhet Hetep, the divine field of peace. So he wants to get to the city of the deity Hetep to commune with him and be at peace with him and align with him. Now, we're going to scroll down a little bit. So that's key. All the fools who are talking about Hotep, niggers, and Dusty Hotep, every time you say Hetep in the real sense, you're invoking a deity of force in nature, and Hetepet, a divine female force in nature. If you misuse the term, you're denigrating a force in creation and taking yourself out of alignment with that. And of course, when people utilize those terms in a negative fashion, those are the same kind of people. When you look at their mindset and their emotionalism, they manifest emotional instability and stupidity, because they're placing themselves in contradistinction and contravention to an actual force in nature whose name is Hetep, as well as the female divinity Hetepet. The next part of the section, we skip a little bit. This is the key part. Once he gets there, he says, let me gain dominion within that field, that Sekhet, for I know it, and I have sailed among its lakes, so that I might come into its cities. My mouth is strong, my speech is strong. When I utter incantations, they're strong because I lived in harmony with divine order, so my prayers are strong. And I am equipped. Let me be rewarded in your fields, O God Hetep. This is an invocation to the God Hetep. Most of these Negroes who are talking about consciousness have never heard of the deity Hetep and have never communicated with him or Nebet Hetepet or the other divinity Hetepet, that female divinity, in their lives. He says he has come, go back, let me be rewarded in your fields, O God Hetep, or Ntoro Hetep, that which is your wish. He's talking to the divinity Hetep, the Abosom Hetep, the Orisha Hetep, That which is your wish, Hetep, is that which I will do. You master of the winds. May I become an Akhu or Akut, a spiritually cultivated ancestor or ancestress therein within your fields. May I eat therein within your fields. May I drink therein, meaning within your fields. May I plow therein. May I reap therein. So we can stop right there. Because after that, there's a series of invocations of the god Hetep that lasts a number of pages, an extensive series of invocations to this divinity. But he came into the field of Hetep that's governed by this divinity, and within his city, he says, allow me to come in, I will do what you ask me to do, so that I can become an illuminated one within, meaning I can become illuminated, meaning quote unquote conscious, become an Akut, an illuminated ancestor, an illuminated ancestress. How do I become an illuminated ancestor and ancestress? So that I can eat within your divine field, I can drink within the divine field. How do I eat and drink within the divine field? Meaning, how do I eat and take in the nutrients or the wisdom within that divine field and drink in the wisdom and the power of this region? How do I eat therein and drink therein? May I plow therein, may I reap therein. So in order to eat and drink, you must first plow and reap. If you plow properly and you reap properly, then what you reap you can eat and you can drink, you can be fed from the nutrients, and you can empower yourself. Agriculturally, if you cultivate the land and so forth and you grow crops and there are no chemicals and all of that, then you can reap what you have sown. And then you can consume that food, and you can also consume that plant life and mineral life in combination, so you can heal yourself, so that you can bring balance to yourself. First, you must plow, SKAI, so that you can reap. And once you reap, you can eat and drink. You can consume what you plowed and you reaped. You can harvest that. And once you consume what you have harvested, then you become an Akhu. Then you become an illuminated one. Then you become one who lives in harmony with divine order every moment of every day. So that's one who lives in harmony with the Ka and the Ka'et. The reason they live in harmony with the Ka and the Ka'et on a consistent basis is because first they engage the SKAI, the plowing, the skyer, the sire, the science, shuts or shins, conscious. In order to live in harmony with the Ka, the Ka'et, they had the SKAI or skyer or sire or science to know. They plowed first. They made the division, the separation. They were able to sow the seeds and so forth after they plowed or made the split. And then they reaped what grew out of that first act of plowing and sowing. And once they reaped the benefits of that, then they consumed it. It empowered them, it energized them, and then they became illuminated or wise. So a conscious or conscious or SKAI individual is one who has plowed, SKAI, reaped, consumed, and became illuminated. If you're conscious, you have become illuminated, meaning you're living in harmony with the divinity that dwells in your head region every moment of every day. That's the definition of consciousness, because you've aligned with the god Hetep as well as the goddess Hetep in their region. This is the proper definition of consciousness and conscious, quote-unquote, community. If you don't have that cosmological foundation, then you don't know what you're talking about with regards to conscious. And all of these idiots misusing the term Hetep are engaged in that misinformation. Now, before we go forward, there's about a minute left in the online version of the broadcast. You can call in 657-383-0635 to get on the phone line. Actually, it's a little bit less than 30 seconds. 657-383-0635, 657-383-0635. And we won't go much longer in overtime. So, and of course, the broadcast will be available in about a half an hour. So, the key here is, in order for one to be conscious in the real sense, you must be in alignment with the Ka, the divinity Ka'et that dwells in your head region. The means by which you do that is to go to the field of the deity Hetep and plow within that field, SKAI or science in that field. Plow in that field of Hetep. And when you plow in that field of Hetep and you reap what you have sown, then you consume that, you become nourished by it, you become empowered by it, and then you become illuminated or become one of the Akhu, not only after death, but also throughout the course of your life. When you're plowing in the field of Hetep, when you engage in ritual practice, so you can plumb the depths of consciousness, get the information you need to get from the spirit realm, from the Abosom and Nsamanfo, sow, reap, harvest, consume, empower, and to become illuminated so you can operate in the world in a harmonious fashion and avoid negative consequences and misbehavior and self-destructive behavior. So you don't create problems for yourself or for your spouse or for your children or for those who you are in communication with. This is the cosmology of consciousness, the etymology and cosmology of consciousness. Have these pseudo-conscious individuals giving you the etymology and cosmology of consciousness rooted in our ancestral tradition, directly tied to not only the term Hetep, but the god Hetep as well as the goddess Hetepet. There's a direct connection between the god Hetep, the Ntoro Hetep, and the Ntoro Hetepet, the Neter Hetep, the Neter Hetep, and the notion of SKAI, consciousness, sire, science, and shus, and the term Ka or Kayat, so that you can be illuminate. As you can see, when people are ignorant, they misuse the term conscious, and in the process, they also denigrate the term Hetep and give it a totally different meaning. If you separate Hetep from SKAI and plowing and the Ka, then you can't be conscious. You have to deal with the deity Hetep. You have to go to the Sekhet Hetep, his region. You have to plow within his field so that you can become nourished and become illuminated so you can align with your Ka. There's a fusion between the Ka and the divinity Hetep, and this is why Osar, when he makes his transition, he goes through the ancestral realm, it becomes mummified, crystallized in that mummification process, becomes impervious to decay. Ra takes up residence with Osar in the same body, like spirit possession, similar to you driving a car and then somebody gets in the car with you and then they're sitting in the passenger seat. Now it's two entities in the same vessel going in the same direction. They give you direction on where to go. Ra takes up residence in the same body of Osar, and you see Osar being called Ka Hetep, the union of the Ka and the Hetep, and that's his title. After becoming purified in the ancestral realm, the spirit realm, we must unify our Ka, our Ka'et, through the agency of plowing within the field of the deity Hetep so that we can become Akhu, illuminate. There's a connection between Ka, Ka'et, and Hetep. If you drop that and don't know the Ka, the Ka'et, the divinity dwells in your head region, you're actually talking about a divinity. When you say Kan, Chus, you're talking about plowing. When you say Shus or Shire or science and Shents and SKAI and so forth, and you're dealing with the divinity Hetep that we deal with after death, but also when we engage in ritual practice at our shrines so we can empower ourselves. When we operate throughout the course of the day, we're operating on a pure foundation. If you don't know that, then you will separate the term conscious from the term Hetep. You'll start using idiotic terms like Hotep community, Dusty Hotepper, Hotep niggas, all this other idiocy, and then the term conscious will become a term you don't want to have anything to do with. You want to say, well, I'm not part of the conscious community. Or you'll start including all kinds of idiots with silly ideologies, clown ideologies that come from the whites and their offspring into the quote-unquote conscious community. People who are lustful, criminal, engaged in drug addiction, aliens, biblical nonsense, Islamic nonsense, Quranic, Talmudic, pseudo-metaphysical nonsense, interracialism, dissexuality, homosexuality, all kinds of idiocy, and try to lump all these people in. That is part of the mood of the whites and their offspring. They saw that when people, and mood and mode of the whites and their offspring, they saw when our people began to awaken a couple of decades ago in a different fashion. We began to transform our lives in an accelerated fashion. they recognized that they had to take the term conscious, which originally meant exactly what we're talking about here, meaning purifying yourself and realigning yourself in ancestral religious culture and practice, and then being the foundation for nationist operations, establishing nationist practices. And that means recognizing the divine order of creation, the expansive pole of divine order is the divine law or love, the contractive pole of order is divine hate. And the whites and their offspring are the cancerous cells in the body of Black humanity. The only solution is their complete extermination. When we understand that, that's pure. When you understand the divinity of hate and the deities, male and female, of hate, then you understand both aspects of divine order. Ma'an, Ma'at are the male and female forces, expansive forces of divine law, or quote-unquote love. That's the expansive pole of divine order. Heru Bedeti and Seknet, or Benai and Abenai, as they're called in Akhan, are the male and female forces of divine hate. When you understand that law and hate are the expansive and contractive poles of order, through law, creation unfolds in a specific pattern. Through hate, that unfolding is imprinted or impressed upon creation, the parameters within which everything must operate. And anything operating outside of those parameters are stamped out. So the forces of divine hate in your body are the immune and lymphatic system. They imprint or impress upon all of the cells and so forth, the parameters within which they must operate. If the cells go outside of that, then they're killed. That's how hate preserves the body, by destroying the disordered cells that would otherwise disrupt and destroy the body. Creation comes into being and unfolds according to law. And law and love is the same word in our languages, ancestral languages. It unfolds according to law, the expression of order. Creation is sustained through hate, the impression of order. You must impress or imprint or stamp the parameters of order on all entities so that when they get outside of that, they can be destroyed, so that you can preserve the integrity of the organism. When we embrace consciousness, we embrace divine law, love, and divine hate. The whites and offspring saw that. They saw us engage in ahojita, self-purification, embracing divine law, love, and divine hate, also recognizing them as the absolute enemy without exception. All of them who exist, all of them who have ever existed, and all of them who ever will exist until we make them extinct are our absolute enemies. Even when they are still in the womb, they are spirits of disorder and are the enemy with perverse vibrations emanating from inside the womb, because they are spirits that incarnate as spirits of disorder. So when people engage in real consciousness, aligning with their Ka and their Ka'et, because they engage the divinity Hetep as well as Hetepet and plowed in his field and her field, plumbed the depths of consciousness, so they can purify themselves through reaping and nourishing themselves and strengthening themselves and aligning with order and becoming illuminate and so forth, and making good decisions, engaging in the 7 principal values of nation building, including establishing a military structure, methods of food production and preservation, curing disease, establishing educational institutions, training institutions, cultural institutions, religious institutions, establishing sound systems of governance and jurisprudence, building homes on acquired land, as well as manufacturing of clothing. These 7 principal values of nation building, we start to engage in that on a regular basis and connecting with one another. They saw that as the threat. Finally, the real threat, not some Islamic leaders, Messianic leaders, or Messianic Christian leaders, and all this other nonsense. They don't mind that because they created that. So they don't care anything about Messianic nationalism. That's a joke because they manufactured it, because they know it's always going to lead to self-destructive behavior amongst our people. But when they saw embracing ancestral religion and actually becoming conscious, that's what they feared. So they had to denigrate the term conscious, denigrate the term Hetep. None of these individuals who are repeating these denigrating definitions, misdefinitions of these terms, know the connection between the Ka, the Ka'et, and the deity Hetep, and the term conscious and the deity Hetep and Hetepet. So they are playing right into the idiocy of the whites and their offspring. But when we embrace reality, then we understand what conscious really means. And we separate the misinformation the ignorant, as well as identify the agents who need to be eradicated, just like the whites and offspring need to be eradicated. So that's the etymology and cosmology of conscious in the real sense, the sound, cultural, cosmological foundation. So we have a few minutes left in the broadcast. If you have any questions or comments, we'll take some on the phone line. You can hit the number 1. A portion of one of the books we were reading from is our book, the OKRAA Complex, the Soul of Akanfo, is talking about the Ka and Kayet. It is the only book that details the nature of the Ka and the Kayet from a real perspective. You have Europeans writing about, the Ka means the spirit. In reality, it does not. But we talk about the Ka, the Kayet, the function of the Ka and Kayet, the divinities that govern the Ka and Kayet, and so forth. All these, a number of different things. Detailed information is the only book written by any scholar, black or white, that details the nature and function of the soul, the Ka, the Kayet, as a divinity dwelling in the head region. So that's one of our 24 books. You can download the ebook versions of all 24 of our books for free. And then we sell the softcover versions. They range between $8 and $11. And we have discounts, for example, the first 5 books, including this book, OKRAA Complex, The Soul of Akanfo. First 5 books, in our set, we have a 20% discount, $40 for the first 5 books. You get Kuku Tuntun, The Ancestral Jurisdiction, which deals with the cosmological foundation of creation, as well as the fact Jesus, Moses, Muhammad, Abraham, Isaac, Ishmael, Solomon, Menelik, Buddha, Brahman, Yahweh, Allah, and all these other characters never existed. And we prove that and show the deities from whom they were manufactured, their stories and taken and so forth. We have Afuraitkaitnit, the origin of the term Africa, proving irrefutably that term exists in the Medusa, the hieroglyphs of ancient Kemet, and the cosmology. Ubin Sheng, the ancestral summons, dealing with ritual practices and their functionality, including shrines and libation and spirit possession, spirit communication, talismans, offerings, and all these different things. We have the OKRAA Complex, the Soul of Akanfo, as we said, and we have Maranechi, Divine Law, Love, and Divine Hate. So those first 5 books, with 20% discount, $40 for the first 5 books. So when you go to the NHOMA page, the publications page on the website, you'll see that button for the first 5 books for $40. We also have a 30% discount on any order of 10 books or more. The first 10 books is $66 for 10 books. And of course, we have 24 altogether. So whether you bought 1 book for $8 or $9 or 3 or discounted 5 or 10 or whatever it is, you can get all those books on the website. The ebook versions of all 24 books, once again, are free downloads from the website. I'm going to take a call on the phone line.
Yeah, Kwesi. You hear me?
Yes.
On a recent show you done in regards to abuse, polygamous abuse, in regards to males seeking, I guess, Afuraitkaitnit women or young women in regards to they find or seeking a child, does it apply the same way to the Afuraitkaitnit female or woman in regards to what you reiterate in regards, control? That's my first question.
So whether you're talking about whether it's someone trying to influence negatively someone, whether it's coming from the male side or the female side?
Yes, like for example, like how certain males they want to influence negative, action and thoughts to towards the females in regards to it's like a sense of control, and
right.
More than just the polygamy, but control in generally. So I'm saying, does that apply the same way to the women or females? Because it applies somewhat to the man. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so it applies just as adults. So it's not natural for one adult to seek to negatively control another adult, whether it's a male or female. It typically leans toward the male because people are, in this society, the one who has the most physical power usually is the one trying to influence negatively the thoughts and movements and actions of the other individual. And since the males are usually more powerful and certain physically, then very often they're the ones who are trying to exercise control, plus they're being raised in this white culture where they despise female. But either way, anytime an adult with a male trying to negatively influence the thoughts, intentions, and actions of a male, or the male trying to negatively influence the thoughts, intentions, and actions of the female, either way it's self-destructive and it's not in harmony with our culture.
Okay. What else? I don't know if this question I asked before, regardless to, I think I might have asked about the tree, because, I did ask that. Okay, now I remember. Yeah, you did. Okay. In regards to consciousness, is that spelled with the word K or a C? In regards to how they...
generally, it's talking about K, even though, depending on what European languages are being used, sometimes they will use it. I'm sorry, it's spelled with a C, but depending on what languages and scripts they use, sometimes they may use a K for that, but talking about a C. Just the regular term consciousness that you see just written in general in English.
Okay. So tonight, the things you go into it is like the root word, like from what they could classify, or what they label as Old English or Germanic language, to what they so-called label it in regards to the root word of consciousness.
Right. So they have a basic definition, but they don't understand the cosmological foundation of where it emanates from, and they won't admit that these root words actually can be found in the language of ancient Kemet, or quote-unquote Niger-Congo languages, because then they would have to, admit that whole quote-unquote Indo-European language phylum is really not an Indo-European language phylum in reality, and everything is sourced from our people. So they'll just pretend it stops right with their people a few thousand years ago, and everything came and sprouted from that source. But we can prove beyond that these terms exist in our language with the same, consonants, with the proper vocalizations, and with the symbols that prove what these words actually mean, like the splitting with the symbol and image of a plow, splitting the land, dividing the land. That's why SKAI means a plow is dividing the land. You can see the plow moving and creating that division or that split. And that's why SKAI in Proto-Indo-European languages means to split or divide, but they don't understand why it means that, but we do. We have the symbol, we have the consonants and the proper vocalizations, but we also have the cosmology connected to deities that gave birth to the sound and the definition and the word, which they do not have. So we prove that. The whites and offspring cannot prove that.
Okay. What else I was going to say? So most of the broadcasts you have done, have you ever went in depth in regards our people particularly that are, you hear the term Eurocentric and blackface? Have you ever went and did more full talk about that? Because even if I mentioned to someone that, what most of our people behave today or act, thoughts, such actions is in a Eurocentric manner, in dark skin or, melanated skin. I don't know if you ever did a broadcast solely on that, because even me explained it's more depth than it's more deeper than it looks, because we don't understand. We operate right now in this region, Western region, to the ones that either know or not, like the Odwirafo, or thoughts, intentions, and actions, and some people don't know how depths this rabbit hole goes. So that's why I kind of asked specifically if you ever did talk about it and heavily.
Right. So we did do a broadcast. If you look at the broadcast dealing with the Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit worldview, there's a specific broadcast that says Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit worldview, African-centered, Afrocentric worldview. That one is where we properly define the Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit worldview and show what that Eurocentric worldview is, and the Eurocentrism and blackface and so forth. We go into detail. That's what the whole broadcast is about.
Okay. And I guess this final question I'm asked because one particular sister told me that she herself one time was still battling and got out of what they call a domestic relationship. It never was domestic at first, but as time progressed, because she known this person for a good while, that it became violent, and she somehow made out of it securely, safely. So I'm not sure if most women or young women know, say, if they're even if they find the signs, but or even if there's a sense of direction where they have to go, because some of them feel like they are split between either they want to stay with it or they want to completely separate from this person. That's my other question.
Right. So and that's why we did the Aakhuamuman, domestic abuse neutralization broadcast, based on that ritual method to overcome those negative influences that will draw people back into that cycle of misery and so forth. So they can check that out. They can check out the webpage, the ritual method, but the Aakhuamuman broadcast where we go into detail to examine that in detail. Because at some point, it's one thing to have some information, but at some point people need to act, and there's a ritual method. And it's really aligning with the kayet, as we were talking about today, for the female, aligning with the kayet to make those proper decisions.
Mm-hmm. Because this particular woman, she still has that sense of, she's out of it, but she always had a sense of feeling within her to always, like, something that's telling her to walk away. And eventually she ignored a few times, but as she comes to realization that, she starts to give into the other thought that's telling and pulling her to draw out of this, dysfunctional, polluted relationship. And that's why I kind of asked, because I think most of every person, they still are somewhat connected somehow. And a lot of people that find it either spooked or not, but they know that at times that you feel something, that's not something to spook, that's something that's in you that's trying to communicate, trying to draw you away from it,
Right.
That it's bad, but you don't have to feel it. So when people come to realization, either men or women, but particularly for the women, for the sake of this conversation, they know it said this is real, that our spiritual power can go as far as how we allow it to take it. It's just how to utilize it to our proper advantage to anything we do in general in life. That's why I kind of mentioned this. Yeah. So.
Absolutely.
All right, I guess. All right, then. Thank you, Madase.
Okay. Appreciate the call. Okay, so we are in the overtime aspect of the show. That was the only call we had, so we're going to end the broadcast here. If you have any questions or comments, of course, you can hit us up on Facebook. We created a new page on Facebook, the Odwirafo page. We're getting close to our 5,000 friends limit on the regular Kwesi Akhan page, so we created an author page. So we post all the information there, post the books, post the broadcast notifications, any events that are coming up when we have our monthly events in D.C., as well as any events in different cities. All of that information, as well as posts, articles, and so forth, posted on the new page, as well as the old page as well, so you can connect there. And again, for those who did not see, we made a post earlier in the week, well, actually yesterday. And when you look at it, it's talking about the OBARIMA, Afurakani Manhood Training Initiative. We published our book, OBARIMA, Afurakani Manhood, back in 2008. And the post we made is showing that this year alone, over the past 12 months, we've had over 16,000 downloads of the free version of the book. And of course, that's the full version. We make our ebook versions free. So those Afurakani males who do not have fathers in their lives or positive role models in their lives, we've reached over 16,000. And of course, even when they download it, they share it. We are able to transform the lives of our people, the males, young and older, right where they are right now, wherever they exist, whether anywhere in the country, even if they're incarcerated and so forth, transforming their lives. They have a manual of manhood, 7 sections based on the 7 days of the week and the deities that govern the solar, lunar, and planetary bodies that govern that 7-day cycle. It's a holistic cycle governing all natural cycles in creation on a weekly basis, that 7-day cycle constantly recurring and so forth. So every day of the week is connected to a specific abosom or orisha vodou, Ntoro, one of the Ntoro and so forth. Every day of the week, there's a principal value of manhood, of OBARIMA, that carries the energy of that day of the week of that abosom. So every day of the week, there's an opportunity to align with the force in creation that governs that day, the principal value of manhood of that day, and a chance and an opportunity for self-purification. People, these 16,000 downloads over the past 12 months have realigned thousands of our young men to transform their thoughts, intentions, and actions and redirect their spiritual power towards productive activity and away from self-destructive activity, away from drug use. We've assisted people in overcoming drug addictions, marijuana, alcohol, cigarettes, other drugs, and so forth, self-destructive behavior, negative domestic relationships, and so forth, and realigning themselves so they become productive, they become entrepreneurial. We have an entrepreneurial program where people can begin, any Afurakani person, male or female, you can begin to work immediately. If you'd like to be a distributor of our 24 books, self-employed as an independent entrepreneur, you purchase the books wholesale, 35% off, and you, of course, sell them retail. And they basically sell themselves when people see them because they're cheap. They're $8 to $11. Most of them are $9. So we have some have taken advantage of that. But we're trying to get the softcover version of the OBARIMA Afurakani Manhood book out to as many people as possible. We already have thousands downloading the free ebook version. So just like the White Snow Spring giveaway, free Bibles and Qurans and watchtowers and all this other nonsense, to our people, the Mormon nonsense to our people in neighborhoods, we need to be able to give away free copies of our books to our people wherever we are. And one of the ones that we are promoting heavily, of course, is the OBARIMA Afurakani Manhood book. We have given away over 1,100 free softcover books to our people at our various events. Every time people come to our presentations, the presentations are free. They're open to our people only. And we give away a free copy of one of our books to everyone who attends. That's the way we operate. We never charge for attendance, and we always give away a free book. So you come to a free event and receive a free book as well, because our people don't always have the funds to purchase and so forth, but they need the information. So in order to keep that going, we have that OBARIMA fundraising operation. So whether you contribute to that, you can receive one or more of our books in return for your contribution. We want to order the ink so we can give away 100 books over the next few days. So please contribute to that. You can just takes a couple of minutes. You can go to the OBARIMA fundraising effort, see it on the Kwesi Akhan page on Facebook. Go there now before you forget. If you can, you can contribute to that. Or if you make a purchase of one or more of our books, that also contributes to our free book giveaways that we have been doing for the past couple of years at every event we have done all around the country. So, again, Yedase, we thank you for tuning into the broadcast. We thank those who have made contributions and purchases of the books to assist us in our efforts. Yedase for that. And Yebeshu Yabio, we will meet again. That's all.